Russia's oil empire, the foundation of its economy, is being dismantled from the air. Ukraine's long-range drones are striking deep inside Russia, destroying refineries, pipelines and export terminals. And the impact isn't just military, it's financial. Billions of dollars in energy revenue are evaporating, forcing Moscow to divert resources, raise prices and patch up an economy under siege. In this video, we'll follow the money to see how Ukraine's drone war is hitting Russia where it hurts most. Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to do a deeper dive into what's going on with regards to the drone strikes and the huge impact that this is having on the Russian oil industry. If we have a look at this calendar, it shows the number of successful drone strikes that have been verified, dating back to the start of June. So you can see that in June there was only one strike, in July only two. However, since the start of August, there has been a huge increase in the success rate of Ukrainian drones. You can see that in August, there were 18 recorded successful attacks. And interestingly, the meeting between President Putin and Donald Trump in Alaska was held on the 15th of August. Now, that was seen as being a potential for some form of peace to be agreed. Now, obviously, nothing was agreed. And you can see that since that date, there's actually been a huge ramping up from Ukraine's perspective. In September, there were 31 successful attacks. And so far in October, there have been 9 verified attacks. And if we have a look at this map, it shows the facilities that Ukraine has been targeting. So you can see Ukraine over on the left-hand side of this map and the sheer size of Russia. It's absolutely huge. And we've got 3 different types of facilities that have been targeted. Terminals are shown by the circular graphic, refineries by the thing that looks like a salt and pepper pot, and then we've got pipelines, which are the lines. And you can see that there are a wide variety of terminals, refineries and pipelines that have been attacked. And Ukraine has been hitting facilities almost 2,000 kilometers from its borders. So these drones are traveling long distances. Just to give you some perspective on the scale of these drones, I thought it was worth having a look at this graphic, which shows one of the drones that's being utilized. And you can see the size of it compared to the 2 operators here. So these are quite large aircraft. Obviously, they're unmanned, so nobody's actually flying them, which means that you don't have to increase the size to have a cockpit. But you can see that they are quite large, and they need to be able to travel those sort of distances, because obviously they're going to need fuel to get there. So you need to have enough space to put the fuel in, and then also you need all of the electronics, and then of course you need to load it with some form of explosive device. So you can see in this example, this drone would be loaded with explosives of between 50 and 75 kilograms, which is basically around 150 pounds of explosives. So that's quite a significant amount, can cause serious damage. And when these planes fly, they often go in convoys where they'll have 20 or 30 of different drones, really to deflect all of the anti-missile fire that Russia is going to be launching against it to make sure that the key drone gets through. So you can see that in flight, this thing is quite large, and you have all of these other drones flying alongside it. Some of the drones are actually flown by remote control, so the operator has a screen and he can see where it's flying. Or they will be pre-programmed to hit somewhere that's actually been calculated in advance. And you can see here, when the drone strikes, it will go down at a steep dive and take out the facility. So that makes it very difficult to be able to hit, because it will pick up a lot of speed and then hit the target. And if we have a look at this graphic, it shows a breakdown of the oil process and where Ukraine has been targeting its attacks. So we start off with the pumping infrastructure, which is critical to pipeline operations. Pumping stations are often in remote locations with limited defences against aerial drones. And since June the 1st, there have been 18 attacks on those pumping infrastructure systems. There have been 32 reported attacks on oil refineries, and I've talked about that in previous videos. And Ukraine has disrupted a significant amount of Russia's oil capacity. It's estimated that at one point it was down by 40%. Now, I think it's slightly higher than that at the moment. It's come back to nearer to 20%, but it's still significant and it's causing major problems. And of course, from Russia's point of view, they don't know when the next attacks are going to hit. there have been 5 attacks reported on oil depots. So that's basically where the oil is being stored once it's been through the refinery process. And there have also been 6 attacks on export terminals. So sea and aerial drones have targeted port terminals. I talked about that recently. We saw a sea drone. I think I shared that footage on Patreon, and I couldn't share it on YouTube because YouTube's very sensitive about any explosions, because if somebody is believed to have died in that explosion, then they will basically take down your video, and nobody can show it. So I didn't show it on YouTube, but it was interesting because it was basically a remote submarine type vessel that was being shot at in the water, and it was just evading all of the different fire, and then suddenly there was a big explosion at one of the export terminals. So Ukraine is attacking multiple different parts of this process. And obviously that's causing problems for Russia because they don't know where to put their defences. They're in fact having to defend all the different parts of all these different facilities, and they're spread over huge areas. And if we take a look at this graphic, which shows what happens to Russian crude oil once it's pulled out of the ground, there's basically 2 different options. The first option, which is seen at the top part of this graphic, is that it goes through the Russian refinery process, so it's refined in Russia, and then it's either used in Russia or exported as the finished products like gasoline, diesel, kerosene. Since these attacks have started taking place, there's been a reduction in the amount of oil that's being refined domestically. That's partly because all these refineries are out of action, and so Russia doesn't actually have the capacity to be able to process the same amount of crude that it was historically. And that's the reason why Russia have introduced the export ban on gasoline, which is across the board, and also a limited ban on diesel products, because they don't have enough to serve their own market. If you've been following the channel, you know that I posted a video recently talking about the fact that certain regions in Russia have shortages, and they've actually limited the amount of fuel that you can buy when you go to the service station. So you're being limited in some areas to as little as 2 or 3 gallons of gasoline, which isn't going to get you very far. The other option that Russia has is just to export the unrefined crude. So basically sell it to somebody else who can then refine it themselves. And most of that is going to India and China, around 70%, and then there's around 30% going elsewhere. Ukraine is attacking lots of different parts of this process, not just the oil refineries, but the storage tanks and the export facilities. So it's causing chaos for Russia across the board. And the economic implication of this is obviously that Russia will be earning less money, therefore it will have less cash. And this is coming at a time when the Russian economy is already struggling. And if we have a look at this chart, it shows the breakdown of where the Russian government is earning its money from. The yellow section at the bottom is oil and gas revenue, and the grey section at the top is everything else. And you can see that back in 2019, so well before the war in Ukraine started, Russia was earning around 45% of all of its revenue from oil and gas. Now that fell in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously reduced the demand for oil and gas because nobody was going to work, there weren't any deliveries being made, everything stopped basically. But it bounced back. In 2021 we saw a recovery, and by 2022 the figure was back up to around 45%. However, as you can see, there's been a significant fall in 2023 and 2024, and the estimate for 2025 is that it will now be down to around 25%. And that compares to 45% before this war started. So you might be thinking, well, that's fine because obviously Russia's just making up the balance from non-oil and gas revenue. Well, it isn't, because this chart is just looking at the split of the percentage, so up to 100%. It isn't saying that Russia's revenue is increasing. What's actually happening is as the oil and gas revenue is going down, so is the total income that Russia is receiving. This is a major problem from Russia's point of view. And if you look at the forecasts for 26, 27 and 28, you can see that it's expected to continue falling. So by 2028, it will be closer to 20%. And what that means is that Russia is simply earning less money because its biggest single source of revenue is oil and gas. So this is an absolute disaster from a cash flow point of view. And if we talk about the implications on the Russian economy, this chart shows the movement in the price of gasoline and diesel from March to October 2025. And what this shows is that gasoline prices, which is what's used predominantly by most people in Russia, have increased by 9.5%. and diesel prices are up by 3.1%. Now, if we're looking at how that compares to oil prices globally, well, they've actually come down over the same period. So Russia is increasing its prices while the rest of the world is benefiting from a fall in oil prices. And the reason for this is obviously because of the shortages and the fact that the Russian refineries are not producing as much end product as they were. So what does this mean in terms of Russia's exports? Well, if we have a look at this chart, it shows the volume of exports, a monthly volume that Russia has been exporting of all of its refined products. You can see that back in August 24, it was exporting around 4.2 million tonnes per month. That rose to over 5 million by the end of 24. However, by the start of 2025, it had come down to around 4.7, which is roughly around 1.2 million barrels per day. However, you can see that over the past few months, there has been a significant sharp decline in the volume of exports, and it's currently sitting at around 3 million tonnes, which is the equivalent of around 730,000 barrels per day. So that is a huge reduction in the export. And the problem that this is causing Russia is that these are the highest margin products. This is where it makes most of its profit. You make a lot more money selling refined products than you do selling simple crude oil. It's basically a raw ingredient. It's like the difference between selling wheat and a loaf of bread. You pay a lot more for a loaf of bread because somebody's gone through the process of actually making that bread. It's the same in the oil industry. You pay a lot more, it's a higher margin product, to buy the finished product. Now, one of the other issues that Russia has encountered is that it's now having to defend all of its facilities. And you can see from this satellite imagery that one of the refineries has actually installed anti-drone nets around some of its critical infrastructure. And there's another photo of a different refinery here, where you can see more anti-drone nets that have been fitted. And it's estimated that these facilities, it would cost around $50 million per facility to install this sort of defense system. So when you think about how many refineries Russia has, they have over 44 of these mega refineries, and they will have multiple of these sort of facilities that they're looking to protect. This has become a huge industry within Russia, trying to build things to protect the damage that could be caused by a drone strike. And I think this is a really interesting point because it's the first time that we've seen these sort of defense systems being built at refineries. Previously, you didn't expect a drone to come in and attack your facility, but since the war in Ukraine started, that's become a common feature of this battle. And unfortunately, it probably means that a lot more facilities are going to have to install these sort of anti-drone nets. So it's increasing the cost of the infrastructure, and also Russia is now having to divert funds that previously it would have been spending on other issues for defence, so probably the war in Ukraine, and now spending it on real defence of its own facilities. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've been talking about the drone warfare that's been going on since the war in Ukraine started. And over the last 3.5 years, I think it's increased significantly in terms of its sophistication. At the start, it was basically remote controlled aircraft with a lot of people trying to work out how to strap some form of explosive onto a little device and then maybe flying at 100 kilometers at best. However, we're now seeing really sophisticated aircraft that can carry huge payloads of explosives traveling up to 2,000 kilometers, which is over 1,000 miles. And when Russia first started its war in Ukraine, I don't think it was expecting that its oil facilities over 1,000 miles from the Ukraine border would be at risk of being hit. But that's exactly what's happening. And as a result of that, the Russian oil industry is now suffering badly. We have seen a large drop in capacity through the refining process. So that means that Russia is now exporting significantly less gasoline and diesel and all the high margin products that it was making lots of profit from. So Russia is still pulling lots of crude oil out of the ground, but it's now having to sell a lot of that crude oil overseas because it can't process it itself. And as we've talked about before, Russia doesn't have anywhere to store that oil. So if it can't process it, then it's going to have to export it. But unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, Ukraine is also targeting the export facilities. So it's targeting places where the crude oil is being loaded up onto ships and tankers. So that's causing Russia problems as well. So it's losing out on both fronts. But the problems in the refinery system are causing major issues in terms of the amount of cash that that industry is generating. And also, it employs hundreds of thousands of people. And when your facility is hit and you have to stop operating, then either you continue paying those people and they're not actually doing anything, or you have to furlough them and you don't pay anybody. But then that means you'll have a problem in the local economy because people aren't receiving any cash. So this is a major headache from Russia's point of view. And as we saw from the data, since the 1st of August, there has been a huge increase in the success rate of these drone strikes. I think that's partly down to the fact that Ukraine is probably now the world's leader in drone technology. It's got thousands of people working on these drones constantly. They're constantly developing new ideas, new concepts, being able to fly longer distances, being more sophisticated in terms of how you actually fly in to hit an area. As we talked about earlier, there are multiple drones going in. A lot of them will be decoy drones that are looking to draw out the fire from all of the defense systems that Russia has. So Ukraine is getting better with its drones and its targeting, and this is causing multiple issues from Russia's point of view. And of course, all of this is coming at a time when the Russian economy is already struggling. It's spending more than it's earning. It's running a big deficit. That deficit is forecast to continue increasing. And the only way to fund the deficit, a bit like when you're overspending, is to borrow some money from somewhere. Now, Russia isn't able to raise bonds at the moment because nobody really wants to invest in them. Obviously, all of the West have sanctioned Russia, so they wouldn't be interested. And a lot of the financial systems and purchases of bonds are based in the West. It could potentially raise some money in China. However, Russia hasn't asked China to do that. And I think there's probably a sort of embarrassment factor of not needing to ask money from China. And also, there would probably be some implications from Russia's point of view. They'd need to trade off and give China something in return for that. So that isn't happening. So what Russia is doing at the moment is drawing down on its national wealth fund. Those funds are dwindling. They're getting smaller. At some point, they will run out. And at that point, Russia will then have to face the prospect of either stopping the war in Ukraine or cutting back on spending elsewhere, or asking somebody like China to give it some money, which should be an interesting discussion, and I'd like to be a fly on the wall during that meeting. But the overall summary of today's video is that the continued drone strikes on Russian oil and gas infrastructure is causing major problems in that industry, which has resulted in a drop in income and profits, and this is a major problem for Russia and its economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you have, then please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I know more than 50% of people watching these videos are not subscribed, so please hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. Thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you've signed up as a patron or a YouTube member, thank you so much for that long-term support. Really appreciate it. And if you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a Buy Me a Coffee member, thank you. Really, really appreciate that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.